We had a few brilliant movies in 2022, but we had some really bad ones. I mean, awful films that they seemingly just threw together. And so I've compiled a list of the worst of the worst. What's not included on this list, or I tried my best not to include, are indies because I understand that sometimes indies are bad because they're limited by the micro budget. And then I've included a couple of indies because they had enough star power despite the budget to make the film great, and it just was bad. On this list, I don't have any animations. I'll keep that for a separate list. On this list, I also don't include films that were bad, but I fell asleep in them. So films like Bubble, Amsterdam, and Morbius, I fell asleep. But what I saw was bad, but I will not include those on this list because I didn't see the whole movie and never revisited them. And then I won't include the bad movies that were streamers, and because I make some concessions that, okay, if it's a bad movie, it should stream. I don't think that we should have to pay, $20, $25 for some really awful movies. So I tried my best not to include those too because, films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that was a streamer, even though it was bad. And Choose or Die, that was a bad film, but it was a streamer, so it's okay. But this list is the worst of the worst. Number 10, Downton Abbey, A New Era. I was so disappointed. It had so much star power in the film, and I never watched the series, but this year I did go see the original film because I had missed it, and I saw it in anticipation of this latest release, A New Era, and it was bad. I think the clothes were beautiful, but everything else, and I didn't feel, being someone who didn't watch the TV show, I didn't feel included in the story. It just felt so disconnected. That was just a dud for me. Number 9, Windfall. Now, this film was a streamer on Netflix and did have a micro budget, but it had star power. It had Jesse Plemons coming off of his Oscar run, his Oscar nomination, Lily Collins, and Jason Segel. And it was supposedly a contained thriller, but it was just a snooze fest. So that's my number 9. Number 8, Alice. Alice had Keke Palmer and Common. So Keke Palmer played this slave girl who didn't realize she was free. The film wanted to be so much like Antebellum, and it just missed the mark. I actually liked what Antebellum was trying to convey, but this was just really, really bad. It was bad acting. It was a bad story. It just wasn't a good film. My number 7, Marry Me. Jennifer Lopez keeps churning out these same films over and over again. But what makes this one worse is that she didn't disappear. You're watching J-Lo in a Coach ad. There is Coach product placement everywhere throughout this film, and that just distracts you from the story that she's really modeling instead of acting. I want her to get back to the place where she was, like her Selena days, because it's just the same role over and over and over again. Number 6, Day Shift. This film is all over the place. It just was not good. I really want Jamie Foxx to have a win, and I think in 2023 he's going to have a few of them, but this missed the mark. There was no chemistry. It had some decent action scenes, but the story was a mess. The chemistry was a mess. The acting was a mess. It just wasn't a good film. My number 5 is Tiger Rising. This is Queen Latifah's worst film ever. She plays this laundromat attendant or hotel cleaning lady. I mean, it's not a good film, and it should have been released on like a streaming service, because this was released in the theater, it probably made $1 million, if that, at the box office. It just was not a good film. The CGI was bad. Tiger Rising was awful. Speaking of worst films of their career, number 4 is Mac and Rita. Diane Keaton deserves so much more. We're talking about one of our greatest actors in modern times, and I mean, this film was a disappointment that was also released in theaters. This film should have been on a streaming service. It has a Freaky Friday concept. It has the concept of Freaky Friday with sort of a twist. I mean, this film is awful. Number 3. I mean, when I tell you I despised Interceptor, it was supposed to be a contained thriller. And Elsa Pataki, I think her action sequences were decent in this film. They were a little slow. It wasn't her fault, but the editing just seemed a little offbeat too. I think that was fine, but the acting just wasn't hitting the mark for me. So I just really didn't like this film. It's a good thing that it was on Netflix, so it's easily accessible. But I mean, I just kept rolling my eyes and shaking my head. It was bad from beginning to end. Number 2 is probably on just about everybody's list, Firestarter. This was an unnecessary remake, and Zac Efron, like, the chemistry just wasn't there, and it seemed like the actors didn't want to be in this film. And it wasn't good. I'm sure it's on everybody's list. It was an unnecessary remake. It didn't do the original film or Stephen King's novel any favors. And they had the audacity to release it in theaters when, if they were going to do it at all, which they shouldn't have, then they should have dumped it on a streamer, because that was a waste of money. Number 1, this is not only the worst film of the year for me, but it's one of the worst films of all time, Blonde. I wish they would leave Marilyn Monroe alone. I thought the worst of this was going to be Ana de Armas's accent. I thought, oh, she's not going to pull off Marilyn Monroe's accent. It's worse than that. This movie is so disrespectful, and I understand that Marilyn Monroe's estate approved this film. This film is awful from beginning to end. It is so exploitative. You would never get away with doing this to somebody like Eartha Kitt or Ella Fitzgerald or Frank Sinatra or Elizabeth Taylor. They wouldn't dare exploit them the way they continually exploit Marilyn Monroe. It was so disrespectful. And the nerve to get a Golden Globe nomination for Ana de Armas, that's a smack in the face. Worst film of the year, one of the worst films that I have ever seen. I hate that I even watched it. Blonde, for me, is the worst of 2022.